Hey guys, I got a cold today. I apologize. Today we're going to test out Roy Adams' air-assisted Treadle hammer, or Treadle. I don't really know how to pronounce it. First, we're going to see if we can forge a knife or two with it. Then we're going to examine its power, and then talk about its strengths, weaknesses, and who it might be right for. How much forging to shape can we actually do with this thing, and will it bevel a knife edge? If you decide you want one, there's a link in the description. It's not an affiliate link. Roy happened to be driving through town and delivered one of his air-assisted treadle hammers to my buddy Will. Will let me test the hammer, and we forged out some blades. The kit assembles really quickly on a 2x4 somewhere in your shop. It doesn't take up much space. There's some good videos on that, so we're not going to show the assembly here. It can be manually powered with your foot, or you can get the air piston and plug it into an air compressor. So here, Will is going to explain some of the key adjustments to me.
So my understanding is that the hammer will strike flat or on its heel or on its toe or whatever, nose or whatever. How do you do that? Let's say I want to point this. How do we get it so the heel is striking sort of at an angle like that?
Right, so what you'll do is there's a pin here that attaches to the main frame where these three height adjustable holes are. We're in the middle position now, so you can move it up, which will have it strike more on the head of the hammer, the opposite of the heel. And then if you move it down, in theory that should let you strike more on the heel. And we'll check that to make sure that's actually correct, but we'll go ahead and adjust it and see how it looks.
Very cool.
So you move the sledgehammer cradle up and down in these three bracket holes, and then the chain above it has to be lengthened and shortened to optimize the length of the hammerhead's travel, which has to be about 12 inches for maximum power, according to Roy. Here, Will is showing that it wouldn't be difficult to rig a latch so that the hammer can be retracted and fixed out of the way when you need to use the anvil by itself. You just have to loosen the chain to the foot pedal. So we're going to try some 1/4 inch flat bar Crew Forge V. This is pretty tough stuff. It's difficult to work. Remember, Will and I have never done this before. This is our first attempt. I'll make a second attempt later. So despite the angling of the hammer, we're still going to get some fish mouthing. Also notice that our hammer's not traveling the full 12 inches. We haven't optimized it at this point yet, and we'll do that later and examine its power afterwards. We're going to chisel away that fish mouth. So this is way sped up because there's a better attempt later where the power is better tuned on the treadle hammer, but I kept it in because it's instructive of some of the consistent issues we still had from effort to effort. For example, pointing. Here's me trying to point another piece of steel, and it's still fish mouths. We just, no matter what we tried, really could not get past that. Now, can it be done? Can you point a bar or piece of steel without fish mouthing? Surely you can. We just haven't figured it out yet. One thing that quickly becomes apparent is that you're going to need some tooling to get this done. You got to strike something that strikes the knife because the hammer hits where the hammer hits. It doesn't. You can't move it to half on, half off, and then back to full face on the anvil. You can't move over the horn. It strikes where it strikes. Unless you can move your anvil around, it just does what it does in the spot that it does it. So developing some tools like this 4140, this fullering thing and the 4140 square bar you saw can help apply different blows to the knife for shaping and other reasons. So keep that in mind. The stuff we're using now is just sort of developed on the fly at the last minute. And I think if you were to develop them further and tweak them a bit, this could really become a reasonably efficient process. It can't all be done with the treadle hammer, so there's some hand forging to profile, and you'll see on the next knife to draw out the heel and do some other things. We've tried some beveling with the Crew Forge V, and it just is not working. We even apply a little tooling here, and maybe we need some better tooling or something, but we just cannot get much of an effect here. So we'll do a little more hand forging for profiling and straightening things, and then we'll just grind in bevels later. Now our next knife we might do a little more beveling, you'll see. For now, let's move on to some 1-inch round. This is 52-100, very tough stuff, very hard to forge. I've cut in a notch there to demarcate the blade from the handle, and then we'll put it under the hammer here, see if we can get it pointed and drawn out. This is not something I would personally do by hand, especially on the reg. This is a lot of hard forging for 52-100 round. It's pretty thick. So I usually use my press in my own forge when I'm working with this material. So it does okay pointing, but when we start trying to fuller and apply tooling, the hammer just loses power because its travel is shorter and it hasn't developed the momentum yet, and it's just not gonna be able to draw this out in a practical way and shape it in the way we need to. I mean, it might, but it's just gonna take hours. That's what it, you know, it's just not practical. And we tried a bunch of different stuff. We just couldn't move the needle. Here's Will working with some 3/16 inch 5160 steel. And he took to this treadle hammer like a duck to water. I mean, his first effort was actually pretty impressive. And he's forged several knives since then, loves the hammer, and has really done some nice work. We fast forwarded it a little bit. We'll see in a second how the final blade turned out. That's Will's first attempt, so like I said, duck to water. Let's see if we can develop some more power by tuning things up. We're going to adjust our travel from the 9 inches where it's currently at up to the 12 inches recommended by Roy. And then we're turning our compressor from 120 up to 140, which he says is the maximum for that air piston. All right, here we go again with 3/16 inch 1080 steel. It's a little bit thinner than our 1/4 inch that we used last time, and it's 1080. It's not as tough to move around as Crew Forge or 52-100. Also, the power of our hammer is a little better now. It doesn't make any difference as far as fish mouthing. It's just going to fish mouth. So I haven't cracked the code on that yet. We'll just have to cut it off. The video is sped up, so I know it's hard to tell, but this is forging much faster than our last effort. Last time it took almost 2 hours to get that done. This is forged in exactly 1 hour and 2 minutes. I put it on a timer. By the way, an hour is still quite slow. I have to be honest. I should be able to forge something this size out of 3/16 in about, I don't know, somewhere between 30 and 40 minutes.
It's not bad. It did do a little bit of beveling. To my taste, I'm going to tune it up by hand, but if you were doing this entirely with the treadle hammer, I mean, it does okay. The heel, this has to be tuned up, and then everything has to be flattened and straightened a little better than I can do with the treadle hammer.
So again, we're back to having to do some hand forging. At this point, I don't think that should surprise anyone. Could those bevels be forged a little thinner? You know, I think so, probably. Whether that could be done with a treadle hammer or just do it by hand, I don't know. I think for now, that's just good enough. Here are the knives I forged after some profile grinding. The first is the Crew Forge, the second is the 3/16 1080. I'll get them finished up later, but for now, let's go back and look at the power of our treadle hammer and see if we can calculate some stuff. I'm going to use some 240 frame per second video to calculate the power generated by each of these two systems, the hammer and then my arm. So this isn't perfect. We really do need a slower film speed to do this more accurately, but we might get a rough idea if one is much more powerful than the other. We're going to count the frames per second it takes to travel 6 inches, and from that we'll do a kinetic energy calculation and then try to get at force in newtons. So here's the physics as I understand them. The treadle hammer with a 12-pound, 5.4 kilogram head basically is being swung at 8 feet per second or 2.4 meters per second. The kinetic energy on that is 15.7 joules, whereas my arm, swinging a 4-pound or 1.8 kilogram hammer, is traveling at 26 feet per second, 7.9 meters per second, much faster than the treadle hammer. Kinetic energy is 56.2 joules. Why is it really like 4 times more powerful than the treadle hammer, my arm? No. Kinetic energy favors speed. You can see the speed is squared. So I don't regard this as a very accurate depiction of the power in these two systems. So let's come at it another way. All right, we can calculate force in newtons, but the force equation uses acceleration, or in this case, I think we would use deceleration of the hammer stopping, but I had trouble getting that plugged into an acceleration calculator correctly. So we're going to come at it a little bit backwards by using impulse, which I found in a YouTube video for hammers. And impulse is basically, starting momentum and final momentum subtracted from each other, and you get a unit called Newton seconds. And then you divide by seconds and you get newtons, which is force. And the seconds is the time it takes for the hammer to stop, essentially, or the impulse to be, the momentum to change. And so I don't know exactly what that is. I think it's probably 1,000th of a second. As long as we use 1,000th of a second for both the treadle hammer and my arm, we should still get comparable results, even if they aren't incredibly accurate. I have no way of knowing exactly how quickly these hammers stopped. So at any rate, that calculation works out to 12,960 newtons for the treadle hammer and about 14,220 newtons for my arm. Well, now what if my arm is actually swinging heavier? It might take the hammer a little bit longer to stop because it's denting the steel a little more, and then you'd have to factor that into your seconds there, and you add maybe a 10,000th of a second to that, and all of a sudden the force is equal. So there's a lot of play here in the minute details, not knowing exactly how quickly the hammer comes to a stop. But essentially, I'm going to say that my arm and the treadle hammer are about equal, that I'm swinging with as much force as the treadle hammer at this point. All right, if these calculations are screwy to you, then they probably are screwy. I'm not a physicist and we just do pseudoscience here, so you can let me know in the comments how I messed this up, because I probably did. But I would say that the results are, I believe them. When I look at how steel moves under the hammer, the treadle hammer versus how it moves under hand hammering for me, I believe that. I think it's about the same. Maybe I'm wrong. Now, I'm a small guy. Most of you guys probably swing heavier than I do, so keep that in mind too. All right, let's carry through this comparison with the treadle hammer and my arm, and we can, I think, use that to figure out who the treadle hammer is good for and what it does well. First off, for my money, I think my arm and the treadle hammer generate about the same power per stroke. And again, you guys sound off in the comments why that's not correct. But I would also note that a lot of you probably swing heavier than I do and may generate more power than the hammer. Next, we have to acknowledge that blows with hand hammering are probably more effective than blows with the treadle hammer because you can strike more precisely and you can turn the hammer face just so and use different parts of the anvil. So forging by hand is probably more efficient for that reason, even if you're not more powerful than the treadle hammer. All right, that being said, how long can a human keep up full strength swings? Probably not longer than a very short period, you know, at least not without wearing yourself out and risking injury, right? So that speaks to the treadle hammer's advantage here. The treadle hammer does lose power with decreased stroke length. So when you use top tooling or you're hammering items that are wide and stand up on the anvil, the strength of the blows goes down unless you adjust the stroke length of the hammer every time you turn something up on its side. So for these reasons, I think it takes about twice as long to forge a knife with the treadle hammer. Now that may improve with the right tooling and more experience, but that's where it stood for this video. So what's my conclusion? Well, Will loves his new hammer. I'm not as enthralled because I already own a press, but with the right tooling or fullers or whatever and some practice, forging knives 90% to shape seems very doable here. Now it's not as efficient as hand hammering, and I don't think you will entirely eliminate hand hammering when forging a knife, but let's say, you know, for those who are disabled or partially disabled or have repetitive motion injuries, this could really get you back in the game. So, you know, Will loves it. You know, at $700, I think it's a good deal as long as you have the correct expectations. And you know, listen, Roy, he's very upfront. He will tell you it's not a power hammer, and it's not, but it's still a useful tool, and it's definitely right for some people. I truly believe that. You'll have to decide if it's right for you. Will is going to try a more powerful piston soon. I'll keep you guys posted on that experiment. In the meantime, have a good one.